Okay, this will be starting in 1 minute. I'm waiting to get
Okay, we're
on
ready
the
to get
webinar.
started.
Here we go.
I'd like to welcome everyone to this self-track training webinar. We're certainly glad you've chosen to join us today. I'm Adrienne Sigmund, Vice President of Training Solutions with Partners in Leadership, and I'll be your webinar host today. Before we get started, there are a few things regarding the mechanics of the webinar that I'd like to review with you. The first of which is that we will be streaming live video of best-selling author Roger Connors during today's presentation. Please note that the live video streaming will only be available to the first 500 participants that have logged in today. Should you experience technical difficulties, please send a chat message to us if you require assistance. Today's presentation is being recorded, and the recording will be available this afternoon. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you'll receive an email providing you with a link to the recording. We have over 1,200 registered participants today, so we've allocated time to answer questions at the end of today's presentation. Please use the Q&A function to send your questions to us. If we're not able to get to your question during the presentation, we'd like you to know that a representative will follow up with you after the webinar, and we'll be happy to answer your questions at that time. Today, we welcome four-time New York Times bestselling author Roger Connors. Roger is the CEO of Partners in Leadership. He and his business partner Tom Smith have authored the most extensive body of knowledge on workplace accountability ever written. With over 30 years of expertise, they are recognized as the worldwide experts on the topic. Recently, their company, Partners in Leadership, was named as one of the Inc. 5000 fastest-growing privately held companies in America. Their #1 award-winning content have enabled thousands of companies and millions of people to achieve dramatic results, reporting billions of dollars in improved shareholder wealth, saving hundreds of thousands of jobs, and resulting in some of the highest praise and best places to work in the world. Please join me in welcoming Roger Connors. Roger?
Well, thank you, Adrienne, and congratulations to you on number 110 webinar. We're just so delighted to be able to sponsor these content-specific webinars around the subjects of accountability and culture change. And Adrienne's been with me the entire time and does a marvelous job. So, Adrienne, thank you for your help with that. Why don't we just go ahead and dive in here on this special webinar today for us. This is a focus on our original product offering that started back in 1994 with the publication of the Oz Principle. It focuses on taking personal accountability for achieving key organizational results. At Partners in Leadership, we have 3 tracks to creating greater accountability. It's called Self, Culture, and Others. The Culture track is based on our book, Change the Culture, Change the Game, and it focuses on how people can think and act, take accountability, to think and act in the manner necessary to achieve key organizational results that leaders are working to accomplish. And finally, the Others track is the other side of the accountability coin, how you hold other people accountable. So the Self track is about what I do to myself to take accountability, to solve problems, work through challenges, overcome obstacles, and get results. The Others track is how you enable others to do that effectively for you on the things that are important to you that you need to achieve. And so with that understanding, all of our books have become #1 leadership bestsellers on all the major lists. And I believe it's because there's a keen understanding and interest in the topic of workplace accountability and culture change. Now, our most recent book, The Wisdom of Oz, I thought I'd mention it here today on this webinar. This book captures and conceptualizes what's delivered in the Oz Principle, but in a non-business, more open general audience format. So it's a smaller read, it's a faster read. It's the kind of book that you can give to anyone in any situation, not just business, and they'll get the gist and understanding of what we're talking about here today on this webinar, which is all about the Oz Principle, and it's the idea of taking personal accountability to achieve the organizational results you're working on right now. Now, just a little bit of background, a little bit more credibility building we want to do here. We have thousands of clients in over 106 countries. These clients are recognized as blue chip companies on all the major lists, and millions of people have been trained in the concepts that I'm going to show you here today. Now, if you notice these logos, you'll recognize these things. I got to tell you, it is so fun for me to walk into a grocery store or a retail store or just go down through the mall or even drive down the freeway and just notice all the clients that we have that utilize our training and consulting services. It's been gratifying from the time that Tom Smith, my business partner, and I started the business over 26 years ago. It was just he and I and a couple of clients to today to see the impact worldwide. It's really lots of fun for me and for him as well. When we use our training, we focus on 3 specific things. Doesn't matter which track you're in. There's 3 primary areas that clients apply the training to, and that I'm hoping you'll be thinking today about how you can apply what we're going to talk about on the webinar in terms of what you're doing. Those three areas are increasing revenues and profitability. It could be EBITDA numbers, it could be profit margin numbers, it could be top-line sales numbers that you're working to achieve. Another area is reducing costs. That could be any kind of optimization effort. It could be Six Sigma, lean manufacturing. It could be dealing with budget reduction. And then finally, implementing enterprise-wide strategic initiatives. That could be around customer satisfaction. It could be around safety. It could be around the customer brand experience. Any strategic effort being conducted throughout the organization. Because in essence, what we're talking about when we talk about accountability is the ability to execute and deliver what we thought we would deliver. And so this is all about enhancing our ability to do that. Now we use the Wizard of Oz metaphor in kind of a fun way to tell our story. The reason we did that is when we were writing the book, our publishers told us, you got to make it interesting. It's about accountability, you know. And so we thought, okay, well, let's think about this. So the idea came forward to use the Wizard of Oz. And so we began exploring that and working with that and found this amazing connection between the story of the Wizard of Oz and accountability. Let me just go through it real quickly. So you probably haven't read the book, would be my guess. Usually when we're conducting a training or a keynote, I've asked that question. Very few hands get raised, but how many have you seen the movie? Of course, everyone's seen the movie, right? So, and in fact, we're interested, find it interesting that globally this story is known in many cultures. So here's the story of the Wizard of Oz. You have these four characters. All of them, through no fault of their own, find themselves in circumstances that they can't control. They've all decided that they've been victimized, meaning something's happened to them that they can do nothing about. Remember Dorothy? She was taken by a tornado, an act of God, from her home to the land of Oz, right? Nothing she could have done about it. It just happened to her. The Tin Man, he wasn't given a heart. The Scarecrow wasn't given a brain, and the Lion had no courage. All four get together at the beginning of the story and have what we call kind of a victim story time, where they're talking about their woes and what happened and why it's not their fault and what could they do. And then they discover this idea with a little bit of help from some visitors that they should take the Yellow Brick Road, and at the end of the Yellow Brick Road they'd find the Emerald City, where they'd find the wizard and he could solve all their problems for them. They were so intrigued with this idea that someone else could solve their problems for them. What a great idea, because we can't solve the problems ourselves. They're outside of our control. So they take off down this Yellow Brick Road on this journey, and they have all sorts of little experiences. They finally end up in the Emerald City. Do you remember the movie? Little Toto, the dog, pulls back the curtain, and you discover the wizard who's standing behind a machine, and he's pulling levers and blowing smoke, but he can do nothing for them. And so there's one last quest they have to take, and that's to get the broomstick from the Wicked Witch of the West. And on this quest, as they go forward, the Lion shows great courage, the Tin Man shows great heart, the Scarecrow shows great wisdom. And then Dorothy, she learns at the end of the story that all she had to do, she always had the power to solve this, all she had to do was click her heels 3 times and say, I want to go home. Well, it's a story of discovery. It's a story about discovering your ability to overcome the challenges you face and enable yourself to defeat those obstacles and get the result you're looking for. It's the story of a journey from a sense of powerlessness and victimization to powerfulness and the ability to succeed. And that's why we love the story, and that's why we use it. We don't talk much more about it after that, but that's what we do. Let me begin this webinar with the premise. And the premise is really simple. Accountability begins by clearly defining the results. What are the results you want to get? Can you imagine holding someone accountable for an unclear result? But how often do we do that? People resent it, they resist it, and sometimes they even take revenge because we call that the 3 R's. But accountability, done correctly, is an enabling power that causes people to get up and go and get things done. But when you don't get it done right, when you miss it, when you don't have accountability clearly set out at the beginning with results we need to achieve, that's where confusion reigns and people get frustrated. In fact, we would say that in most cases, and this is borne out in our workplace accountability study that's been conducted of over 40,000 respondents, over 2 years of data collection, and the margin of errors are very low. Here's what we've learned. 9 out of 10 senior management teams fail to clearly identify the results that they need to achieve. Now you're saying to myself, that's crazy, I can't even believe that. But it's absolutely correct. I've got to tell you, in my 30 years plus of management consulting experience, it is the rare organization where I can sit down and interview everyone on the senior team and say, what are your top priorities? And consistently they can tell me not only the priority, but the number that's behind it. Here's a quick example. Working with a European management company at a pharmaceutical organization. This is over in Europe. The general manager of all the countries, the general manager of each country was there. And they have their boss, the president of that region. And we asked them, what's the result you're accountable to achieve? And they said it's BUCK. It's an acronym for Business Unit Contribution. And then we asked the next question that we always ask. It's, okay, so what's the number? And the room went deathly silent. Nobody said a thing. Finally, everyone started kind of pointing to the CFO sitting in the back room and said, he can tell you. We said, no, we're not going to let you off that easy. Everyone take out a sheet of paper and write down what you think the number is and pass it back to the CFO. Well, the exercise went on. About 5 minutes into the meeting, the CFO stood in the back of the room and made an announcement. He said, I just need to announce the results here. There's a $300 million variance between the high number and the low number that was written on the pieces of paper by this management team. You guys don't know the number. And that was true. How can you be accountable for a result if it's not clearly defined? And yet that's at the senior management level. Imagine what that was like throughout the entire organization. How can people be empowered or enabled to go achieve a specific objective if they aren't really clear on the result? Now, most leaders tell us, I've got all sorts of results. I got too many results to even number. We work with one organization that had 150 corporate objectives. That's right, 150, 150 corporate objectives. Now, that's appropriate in the planning phase. It's going to break down to that in a large organization. But our contention is that you have a leadership obligation to create clarity around the top 3 or 4 key results that needs to be achieved. Now, we ask people in our accountability study, are the key results clearly defined in your organization? 40,000 respondents over a number of a variety of industries and job titles. Here's what they said. Only 86% said that the answer was no. Only 14% said that, yeah, those results are clearly defined. Then we asked them, do your priorities change frequently, creating confusion around the results that you need to achieve? Well, I'm sure you can guess the answer to this. 84% said yes. Accountability begins by clearly defining the results. Now, in order to participate a little bit, we get a lot of positive feedback about polling on our webinars, and so we've incorporated a polling feature. I've been doing this for a long time now. It seems really useful for you to benchmark. So if you go to the right-hand side of your screen, in that panel, you're going to see a polling panel pop up. We're going to post the first poll. We'd ask that you take that poll. If you're sitting as a team, then what you can do is you can just do a quick majority vote. So just go around and say, what is every A or B, and you get the majority and you report that result. When you report these results, don't worry. This is anonymous. We're not tracking which company said what. We're just getting the information in the aggregate so we can feed it back to you and you can see the value of benchmarking against others on the webinar today. So why don't we go ahead and we'll give you a minute and a half to, actually I'll give you 2 minutes to take this poll. All right, why don't we go ahead and post the results of that poll. So I have a little group here today with me as well, and we just conducted that poll ourselves and reported the results. Again, if you're sitting as a team, the best way to do that is just do a majority vote and then report that majority vote. We'll be posting these responses here in just a minute. They'll pop up on the screen, and you'll have a chance to kind of benchmark, where are you at relative to other organizations. Of course, we ask about performance management because it's what usually the mechanism organizations use to tie all these results together. Let's go through the results. Number one, our organization has defined a set of just 3 or 4 key priority results we need to achieve, and these have been communicated to the entire organization. 58% said true, and 40% said false. Number 2, our performance management process effectively ties individual work objectives with these top few most important priorities of the organization. 37% of us said yes, it's a home run. Half of us said no, it's not delivering, and that's not uncommon. And 10% said we don't have a performance management process. Number 3, people on the front line should understand the top 3 or 4 results the organization most needs to achieve. 94% of us said, I agree this is essential. We might, in the future, we might do I agree and then I agree this is essential. Our point of view would be, I think everyone would agree that's a nice to have, but our contention is to have to have. The front line needs to understand the results we're working on and connect their work with it. Number 4, the majority of people on the front line understand the top 3 or 4 results the organization most needs to achieve. 61% of us said that was false. Now, when you go back, if you go back to your tab, select the Participants tab at the top, it'll get you back to the video streaming, and you'll have a chance to see that again if you'd like to. And again, I think only the first 500 people on actually did video streaming. It's a limitation of WebEx. So if you log on after that, you won't see the video, but you'll see the slides and hear the audio. Well, here's our premise. When it comes to getting things done, this is really important, everyone. This is key. If you don't get accountability right, you probably won't get anything else right. It all begins with getting accountability correct. You can't execute on a platform of confused or misaligned accountability. It can't be done. I mean, you can execute on that, but you won't execute well. There'd be super inefficiencies and lack of process that doesn't drive true results and traction if you don't get the accountability equation right. You have to start there to get it working. Now, so what do we mean by accountability? Because most people would say accountability in our organization is something that happens to me when things go wrong, rather than something you do yourself to make sure it gets right. There's 2 sides of the accountability coin. There's kind of this feeling of there's consequences when you hold people accountable, but there's also the side of accountability that says, what can I do to take accountability to ensure success? That's the side we're talking about. That's the Oz principle accountability training side of the accountability equation that's most important. We capture that side with this chart, the steps to accountability chart. Our book, The Oz Principle, takes this chart and organizes the book all along the chart itself, having a chapter on each one of these key points. As you notice in the chart's divided in half by a line. Above that line are the steps to accountability. We define them as to see it, to own it, to solve it, and to do it in that sequence. First we see it, acknowledge the reality of the situation we're in. Then we own it, make a connection and a link between what I've done and where I'm at with what I'm going to do with where I want to be. And then I solve it by asking the solve it question, what else can I do? And then I do it. I follow through and do the things that I say I'll do and take accountability to stay above the line while I'm doing it. Below the line, at the bottom of the chart, is where we tend to go when we're faced with tough obstacles, tough problems, difficult circumstances that seem outside of our control that we can't seem to fix or change or move forward. It's a natural thing to fall below the line. It's not wrong. It's just human nature. And we do it often because it's so enticing. There's this gravitational force that's saying, hey, you got a good reason. Come on down here and get stuck. And so we do. I mean, we end up blaming other people, finger pointing, covering our tails, wait to see what's going on. All of these things, confusion, tell me what to do, ignore, deny, those all naturally happen when faced with tough obstacles. And sometimes it's difficult to break that gravitational pull. But I'll tell you what, when you as an individual, or you as a team, or a group, or as an entire organization, make the choice, and it is a choice, to say, all right, there's some legitimate reasons for being down here, but I'm going to ignore those, and I'm going to move above the line and focus on results, amazing things happen. Just ask Dennis Antonori, the VP of Sales at IVAC Corporation, when they were told for the 3rd year in a row In an organization that needs new products every 6 months, for the third year in a row, no new products. Can you imagine how they felt when they heard that? The VP and R&D just had done a reassessment of their patent issues and realized it would cause a year delay. Well, immediately, the dentist says that his East Coast manager and his West Coast manager, RVPs, called him. Said, Dennis, we got to meet. This is horrible news. And so they got on a plane as quickly as they could, and they met in St. Louis. They didn't even get out of the airport. They found a meeting room in the airport and sat down. And they'd just been through this training, by the way, and his regional manager looked at Dennis as soon as he sat down and said, Dennis, do you mind if we go below the line for a few minutes? Dennis looked at him and said, no, I think that'd be entirely appropriate, but we're going to limit ourselves. And so he set his wristwatch for 30 minutes. And for the next 30 minutes, they talked about all the reasons about why this wasn't fair. The sales number wasn't going to change just because R&D wasn't able to get the product through. That they would still be held accountable to keep the best people in the sales field and still grow the business. How in the world would they be able to do that when the carpet was just pulled out from underneath them? Well, then Dennis's wristwatch went off at the end of 30 minutes. And he said it just went silent. His two RVPs looked at him and thought, are you really going to do this? Are you really going to change the conversation? Dennis looked at me and said, okay, you guys, now we need to get above the line and ask ourselves the question, what else can we do? For the next 45 minutes, they sketched out a plan of the questions they would ask, the people they would talk to, and the things that they would do to move forward despite the obstacles and the circumstances. Now, you're not going to believe it. At the end of the year, they had the top performing sales number in the history of the company. They were in a portfolio of medical device companies owned by a parent company. The parent gave them an award for the best performance that year in nearly every category. No new products for 3 years in a row. When you ask Dennis, how'd your team do this? Dennis says, well, it wasn't because of new products. It was because of a new way of thinking. We were able to think differently about how to solve this problem, and it had a huge impact on what we're trying to do. There's power in moving above the line. Here's why we get stuck. This is a dictionary definition of accountability. Subject to having to explain, report, or justify, being answerable or responsible. You know, I can ask you right now with your training, is that above or below the line? Take a look at that for a minute. Is that above or below the line? Subject to. Someone's doing something to me. Having to report. Oh, geez, I got to tell everyone what's going on. Explain or justify. Here's my story about why I'm not there yet. Responsible, answerable sound pretty good. Well, this definition is what's happening in corporations today, and it's driving people below the line. And it's not effective, it's not impactful, and it's not powerful. We have a different view of how to do that, and that's with our Oz principle definition of accountability. Let me share it with you. Accountability is a personal choice to rise above one's circumstances and demonstrate the ownership necessary to achieving results. To see it, to own it, to solve it, and to do it. Fill the organization with people who are thinking like that, acting like that, and you get amazing results. Now, let's explore these steps above the line. The first step is to see it or to acknowledge reality. Now, to see it means to be able to see the whole picture. And there are, in our workplace study, we've uncovered 16 accountability traits, 4 that match each of these steps above the line. These are the key traits that people exemplify when they're acting and working and moving in that phase of the accountability chart. So when people are seeing it, here's what they do. They obtain the perspectives of others, they're open and candid in their communication, they ask for and offer feedback, and they hear the hard things so they can openly see the reality of the situation that we're in. This is absolutely key to understanding that when we talk about see it, in terms of your team environment, the group you work in, or organizationally, the entire enterprise, it's creating an environment that fosters this kind of ability to be open and candid and transparent. As you do, you enhance your ability to see it. You can now see more clearly because you have the perspectives of others that you work with. Now, the key question to ask in the see it phase is real simple. It's what is the reality I most need to acknowledge in the face of this situation I'm in? What is the reality I most need to acknowledge? Now, in conjunction with this, as a part of see it, we're introducing to you this notion of what we call the accountability gap. And the accountability gap is the difference between what's actually occurring and exactly what you want to have happening, what you want to occur. Now, there's a definition for an accountability gap, and I want to get a little technical with you here for just a minute. An accountability gap is a gap in performance that's related to one of the key results you've set, one of the 3 or 4. Okay, so that's it. It's a gap in performance. It's a performance gap, which there's lots of, right? But this is not just any performance gap. This is not your ordinary performance gap. This is not just a performance gap. It's a performance gap related to a key result. Do you know what we do with performance gaps related to key results? When you have an accountable organization, you close them. You don't ignore them. You don't work around them. You act to close them. And that's important here. So I'm going to give you 3 examples of gaps, and we're going to work through this a little bit. One, the first example would be a key result, which is to increase profit margins by 5%. Another key result is a product launched by October 9th. And then a third example will be a 95% customer satisfaction rating. So let's just go to this first one. Remember, the gap's the difference between what's actually occurring and what you want to have occur. And then the difference between that is the actual gap, the accountability gap you're going to close. Why do we call it an accountability gap? Because when it's a performance gap related to key results, we take accountability to close it. When it's a performance gap related to a key result, we don't ignore it, we don't work around it, we take accountability to close it. So let's go through this. This key result was increasing profit margins by 5%. So what we want to occur in this restaurant that had this goal, they needed to sell 20 extra desserts a month. That's what they needed to do. They just needed enough margin from doing 20 extra desserts a month that it would hit their number. Where they were at, what was actually occurring, they were only doing 13. So the performance gap was 7 desserts. Now that's not just a performance gap, that's an accountability gap because it's related to the key result of increasing profit margin by 5%. Let's take another example. What we want to occur, in this case it was a new product launched by October 9th. This new products company had launched by the 9th. Well, what was actually happening is they were behind schedule and the estimated launch was the 20th. So the gap that they were facing was 41 days. That's not a performance gap, it's an accountability gap because it's related to a key result. Okay, I think you're getting the idea, but let's just do one more. This is the fun one. This is a 95% customer satisfaction rating. What we want to occur is 95%. What's actually occurring is 72%. So we have a gap of 23% that we need to close. Now, when it's an accountability gap, we take accountability to close it. How do you do that? How do you close an accountability gap? Well, you use what we would call our SOSD accountability tool. Now, when I say SOSD, that's an acronym that stands for See It, Own It, Solve It, Do It. And a great way to remember the sequence is just SOS, like help me, close the gap, D. SOS, D. See It, Own It, Solve It, Do It accountability tool. And we have these 4 questions that we're going to present to you that you asked. I've already presented you the first question in the See It phase, in the See It step, which is what is the reality I most need to acknowledge. Now, this is really important. In our training, when we conduct our training and workshops, we work a lot on feedback with the groups we're working with because it's absolutely essential. Feedback creates accountability, and accountability drives the feedback that you need. People go seek it. So we have a feedback model that we use, and the feedback model is simply we ask people, what feedback do you have for me? Now, if you ask people, do you have any feedback for me? That's a yes or no question, and oftentimes that's going to be no. So you want to get feedback. And the only way you're going to get feedback is you've got to convince people you want it. So you ask them the question, what feedback do you have for me? And then they will respond and give you the feedback, both appreciative and constructive, and then you say thanks for the feedback. And that's just how that process works. In fact, our clients have fun with that because it becomes a part of the language in the organization when you say thanks for the feedback. It's just code for, okay, I get it, we're in this process. And we understand this basic concept. Accountable people seek feedback. They take accountability to get feedback. And then feedback creates accountable people. They're able to take the See It step and get above the line. Let's go to poll number 2, and we'll post that on the right-hand side of the screen. Again, if you go down to the polling tab, you'll see that pop up. I'll give you 2 minutes to answer these 4 questions. By the way, as you're doing this, when you look at the questions, look at the screen. When it comes to See It, how well would you rate how well your team leaders and organization as a whole do the following? And then these are the answers. So that's the question on the right-hand side of the screen you're answering. Or excuse me, the left-hand side.
okay, I'm doing this. I submitted this to show that, I make myself accountable in every single thing I do. So the perspective of others, definitely a clear strength. I ask for feedback. Hearing the hard things, absolutely. I want to hear them. I want to hear them all so I can fix the situation. And I ask and offer feedback all of the time from my upline.
All right. So again, we're going to post those
here we go.
poll results in just a minute. Again, if you go back to the participant tab, if you want to see the video streaming, if you were among the first 500 to log in, you can get that back up and running, and we'll show it to you. Let me just go back to this question here. When we're talking about the ability to do these things that are the traits that people display when they're in the see it mode, it becomes absolutely critical taking that first step above the line. If you look over the right-hand side of the screen, you're going to see the results from the polling. You can see obtaining perspectives of others. 66% put it on the positive side. Being open and candid in my communication. That's even more positive, right? So we're looking at 60, 70, almost 80%, just under. And then asking for and offering feedback, again, it's in the 60s, we'd say that's low. And then finally, hearing the hard things to see the reality, to openly see the reality of the situation, again, that's a little lower. What we would say in best practice organizations, you have to be calibrating at 80% of above as a clear strength to get the advantage that comes from creating an environment where people can see it. Now, one of the things that we offer partners in leadership that we discovered, and I think this is relevant to just point out, is the use of digital tools. We have a digital tool set where you can actually exchange feedback digitally, not via email, but through an app. What's really interesting about this is I found, and I think most others experience it borne this out, people are more honest digitally than they are in person. They have time to think about it, to compose it, and then to send it, and it's a little bit more arm's length. It's kind of like getting in your car. Have you ever noticed that when you get in your car, all of a sudden you're more powerful? Well, the same way with a digital tool set. You get in the automated feedback tool set, and you think you're more powerful. So that could be good or bad, I suppose. All right, let's keep going. So now we're going to take the next step above the line, and we're going to own it. Let's talk about what it means to own it. It's these 4 traits that are present for people, groups, teams, and organizations that own it. They're personally invested. They learn both from their success and failures. They ensure that their work is aligned with key results. And then finally, they act on the feedback that they receive. We're talking about here, when we talk about ownership, this is really important. We're talking about the ability to connect, to link where you're at with what you've done. If you've got a gap, let's say your gap is that number of desserts, right? Forget, was it 7 or something like that? 7 desserts? If that's the gap, then the question isn't what's everyone else doing. In fact, let me just go back to that slide for a minute if I can find it real quick. This is an important part of our conversation. When we're talking about gaps and what we're doing, we're talking about 7 desserts a month. It could be that you could blame the table setters, you could blame corporate for not having the resources, they didn't have the dessert trays right, whatever it is, or we're not staffed enough in the restaurant. That would be how the conversation below the line would usually go. Now, those may be legitimate issues, and most of the things that take us below the line have a certain legitimacy to them. That's why they have a gravitational pull. If they're all made up, there's no gravitational pull. But it's because they're legitimate that it entices us to come down below the line and say, I'm stuck. But when you recognize that there may be something else you can do, some other steps you can take, just like Dennis Antonori and his 2 regional VPs who said, what else can we do despite no new products? That's where you get the value. And that's what it means to own it. When I link what I'm doing, so maybe I'm not asking about desserts in a compelling way. Maybe I'm not setting it up with the customer when I come at the beginning of the meal. Be sure and leave some room for dessert. I'll ask you towards the end of the meal if you'd like some dessert. Maybe I don't mention, hey, you got to try the sundaes. I mean, they're the best. How many of you guys want a sundae? How good are you at presenting that? So it's being able to link your performance and the issue, the gap, and what you're doing. Really key to being able to move forward, and that's the value of being able to move up above the line. Now, so when we talk about ownership, we're talking about that linkage. And so it leads to this question. How am I contributing to the problem and or solution? So often in organizations, what we find is that there's a difference between doing the job and achieving the result. And here's the difference. People can go through the motions, they can get their stuff done, and yet we haven't achieved a 5% profit margin, we haven't launched on date, and we haven't created customer satisfaction. And yet people think they're successful. Well, that gap has to close within organizations. We need to be accountable for the things that really matter. And the things that really matter are the results that we need to get those top 3 results. So our view on this is simply this, that when you hit a performance gap that's related to a key result, it becomes an accountability gap, and you have to close it. You have to close accountability gaps. That's rule number 1. The second question to doing that, the first question is what is the reality or if we're doing it as a team, we most need to acknowledge. And number 2, how am I, or again as a team, we contributing to the problem and or solution. Well, let's move on to the next step, and that is to solve it. So the solve it question, or the solve it traits, they're really clear and kind of grouped together in a really consolidated way. It's all about being creative, thinking differently, and finding how to move forward when you would have been stuck. So constantly asking what else can I do, collaborating across functional boundaries, creatively dealing with obstacles, and taking unnecessary risks. It's all about this mindset of saying, what else can I do to move forward, solve the problem, get the results we're looking for. And I'll tell you what, we've seen some very creative problem solving happening within organizations to get stuff done. One organization was working on a profit margin objective and was stuck. They just weren't able to move forward and close the gap. They had one it was a financial analyst who worked for the course of one evening and discovered there was a place where the margins could be collapsed significantly if they just changed the way they did accounting. They changed the way the accounting numbers were being done. So they made that adjustment, and boom, they were able to, almost overnight, close the gap sufficiently to get the result they were looking for. Now, what happened to that person? They weren't asked to do that. They took accountability to say, I own that enterprise-wide result. I want to help us get there. What else can I do to make a difference and accomplish that result and get the job done? Just empowering when you get a whole organization thinking and acting that way. What else can I do? Now, I got to go back to this for just a minute. I don't know about you, but I love the Roadrunner cartoon. If you watch Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, and how Wile E. Coyote is always trying to capture that Roadrunner. You know, even though he's usually not successful, because if he was successful, the cartoon would be over. I mean, we all get that, right? The basic plot is he can never catch the coyote. So when you understand that, you can't criticize him for never winning, because he's set up not to win. But look at the way he thinks about how to get this coyote. I mean, every little cartoon is a new idea, some creative way of trying to capture this Roadrunner. So the next time you want to pump on what else can I do, watch the Roadrunner cartoon and see what you think about it. All right. So that question is the third question that we ask in the accountability tool. What else can I do to close the gap? Now, look, we all work in complicated organizations. Some of us are virtually located, some are co-located, but more often than not, we're on virtual teams. Even in the same organization, even in the same building, we don't see each other. We work from our desks and cubicles. So you can be co-located in the same physical space and still be virtual. And that's the challenge in today's world. We all have responsibilities and things to do. And often our organization looks just like this. And as you can see, that leaves cracks in the organization. There's things that can fall through the cracks. And usually we try to solve that by creating more responsibilities, bigger list of job descriptions, and adding more people. But often that doesn't work. What does work is having people have a sense of joint accountability for achieving the results they need to achieve. This is how you overcome cross-functional issues and boundaries. What unites us are the results we need to achieve. You will never be able to tell people what to do enough to accomplish key results. Never. Tell me what to do isn't a winning strategy for the person who's working or the person who's managing. It just doesn't work. It has to be what else can I do. Not tell me what to do, but what else can I do? When you create that kind of a culture and environment, that's when you get things moving. And what that results in is some amazing stuff. It results in the kinds of things that gives us results that we're not achieving, but would achieve if we got everyone functioning on all cylinders. All right, so let's look at what the solve it characteristics are in terms of the poll. So let's go ahead and post the poll on the right-hand side of the screen if we could. Let's benchmark again against this. We'll give you 2 minutes to answer these questions. Again, on the left-hand side of the screen is the question. When it comes to solve it, how would you rate how well team leaders in the organization as a whole do the following? Remember, We're asking about team leaders here, so we're not asking about you. How well would team leaders in the organization as a whole do the following? And then respond on the right-hand side.
Are you seeing where this fits into our organization?
All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this and see what we did. We're going to post the results on the right-hand side of the screen here in just a minute. We'll get really clear on some of it. I was just informed with some opening candid feedback to me that I missed the poll number 3, so we'll go back and pick that up here in just a minute. We'll get that. So we'll have the responses here in just a second. This is a really essential step in terms of creating a culture where people can ask this question, feel like they should ask this question, what else can I do? Well, as you'll see, we've got a little short and smaller percentage than the last poll that we did. We only have about 59% who are up in that upper strength. Now this is a yellow flag for me. This is saying, okay, this is a cultural impediment to solving problems and getting traction. Collaborating cross-functional boundaries is always around the 55% mark, and you'll see that there. Again, not as strong as the last poll. Creatively dealing with obstacles, we're looking at 62%. And then finally, taking the necessary risk, that's about 54%. That's about half and half is about what we get out of that. Let's just go back and we'll post the poll number 3. Let's just get that one out of the way real quick just to see how you respond to that. So that would be the Own It poll. And let's go ahead and get to the right slide on that. It's not responding for some reason. So here we go. I'm just going to click through to get to there. And there's the poll. So go ahead and if you could take just 2 minutes to answer these questions. This is on Own It. Remember, we're talking about team leaders here. How well would you rate team leaders? Give you just another 30 seconds on that. All right, well, we'll go ahead and post the results of that poll on the right-hand side of the screen in just a minute. I just went through. I've been with this team on this side. I've been asking those same questions, and really been interesting to hear some of the observations about where we're strong and where we could do even better as an organization. But overall, I'm really happy with what I'm hearing in terms of some of the progress we're making in our own culture of partners leadership to live these traits. It's going quite well. Okay, so poll number 3, being personally invested. When it comes to own it, how well would you rate team leaders in the organization? This is a pretty high ranking here. We're at 40 or 80%, right? So 80% being personally invested. Learning from both. By the way, the most recent Gallup engagement poll found that only 35% of managers were engaged in the clear definition that they use: committed, enthusiastic in the work that they do. So that's an interesting comparison here. Learning from both successes and failures. We have about we got 40, again, 80, 60, 70% that are showing up in that higher side. Ensuring that my work is aligned with key results. Here we take a drop, not as strong, and acting on the feedback I receive, again, not as strong. So really strong on I'm invested, not so strong on my work being aligned and willing to take the feedback and act on it. All right, so I'm going to move on to the last step above the line, and that step is to do it. The do it step is an important step. It's a step that you have to take. It means you do the things that you say you'll do. These traits exist where people are exhibiting the do it phase in terms of both their team's individual work as well as the entire enterprise. Doing the things I say I'll do, staying above the line by not blaming others. It gets really challenging to go forward with plans and close gaps. There's this temptation to constantly drop back down below the line because you're gonna encounter challenges, obstacles. The best thing you can do is make a plan and just know that plan's going to change, right? So to make a plan, work your plan, then watch while your plan works. But understand that you better have contingencies because there will be challenges. And that's when we can drop below the line. Tracking progress with proactive and transparent reporting. And then finally, building an environment of trust where people can count on the fact that you're going to do the things that you say you'll do. So this do it phase really is embodied by this question: what am I accountable to do by when? Or if it's with the team, what are we accountable to do by when? And that shows up here in this last question on the SOSD accountability tool. Remember what SOSD stands for. SOSD, SOS, help me close the gap, right? So see it, own it, solve it, do it, accountability tool. And these are the 4 questions that you would use to ask anytime you hit an accountability gap. Now remember, an accountability gap is a performance gap related to a key result. What we do with accountability gaps is we take accountability to close them because it is related to a key result of the organization. Now I got to tell you, the best example I've ever heard of this is when I interviewed Jim Harris, a jet fighter pilot. He was a top ace fighter and a Top Gun trainer. He flew 430 missions in Vietnam. He said the most difficult thing that anyone can do in the military is to land a jet on an aircraft carrier at night. Now think about this for a minute. You got this jet steaming along at I don't know how many hundreds of hours, but when it hits the deck, it's going 150 miles an hour. It has a little tail hook that has to catch 1 of 4 wires, and if you don't catch it, you better take off again or else you're plopping over the side of the boat. So what they have to do is land and take off at the same time. Did you hear that? At 150 miles an hour, they have to land and then put the jet into full throttle in order to take off again in case the tail hook doesn't catch. Now listen to this. They're targeting a ship. If you've ever been on a cruise when they lost the buoyancy thing, you know what this is like. The ship's going side to side, up and down. It's got yaw. I mean, this thing's moving all around. You have wind blowing over the top of the deck, and then you have this plane, this jet trying to land, and it's fighting the wind as well, trying to line up. It's not autopilot. You can't just click on the autopilot and land. This is all manual, and they have to do all this at one time. This is incredible. It's a controlled crash is what they call it. Well, now, so what happens is because it's so important, because it's so important to get it right, they grade each landing. And you have 4 grades: okay, a fair, a bolter, and a no grade. Well, they also have a 5th grade, which is called okay underline. You notice there's no excellent or outstanding or ace pilot. It's just okay. What does that tell you to begin with? This is so hard that the best you're ever going to do is okay. And an okay underline, I think he said, is when you land the jet, you jump out of the cockpit, you run up and you serve the captain some coffee, you come back down, you say hi everyone on the deck, and you jump back in the plane and take off. That's an okay underline. He had 2 of those in his career as an ace fighter and Top Gun instructor. So what they do, after every flight, they grade every landing. And then they debrief those grades in a transparent way with the whole team. Open feedback, open accountability, transparent accountability, open and candid discussion. So what can we learn from them? What can you learn from these top ace fighters about what to do when something's really important? Well, you learn to be open and transparent, and you grade it, and you report the grade, and you make sure everybody knows it. So let's go to poll number 5. We'll report that on the right-hand side of the screen. When it comes to do it, again, we're talking about team leaders here. How well do team leaders in the organization do the following? I'll give you 2 minutes to answer these questions. All right, remember this is team leaders, and I'll give you another 30 seconds. We'll wrap up here in just a moment. By the way, I'll mention at the top of the hour, I'll stay on for Q&A, and I'll stay on as long as we have questions. I'll do my best to answer your questions. So if you do have questions now, you can chat those to Adrienne, our host. Actually, use the Q&A tab that's on the right-hand side of the screen, and then send those questions over to her. She'll present those questions to me for answers. So please feel free to do that and stay on as long as you'd like. All right, let's post the responses on the right-hand side of the screen. This do it step is a key step in the process and requires a great deal of consciousness. This is where we have to be intentional. You can tell when someone's intentional or not, right? When our intention is clear, we make it happen. The most intentional I ever see employees ever is when they're trying to get their home loan closed. That's when I see people intentional. I mean, they will do anything at any time, anywhere to go make that happen. Get that puppy closed. And I totally understand it. I'm the same way. But that's a good example of being intentional. Let's look at the right-hand side of the screen. Doing the things that say I'll do. 68% of our team leaders reflect that, staying above the line by not blaming others. Not so good here. This is not as strong. We got what? 52%. So getting about half. Again, tracking the progress, proactive and transparent reporting. Again, about 51%. And then building an environment of trust. You know, down here we drop a little bit, and we're at 50%. So plenty of opportunity in terms of what our polls suggest. And what we're talking about here is learning how to use this tool. Now, obviously, Partner Leadership has formal training that we can take you through this. You can read the Oz principle, but a lot of this information about the tool itself that I presented to you today is not in that book. But what is in the book is this clear focus on creating accountability to operate above the line. And you can read more about that, take some little self-assessments as well, and find it to be a benefit to you as you work through it. In the training, we actually offer a fold-out, and this is the fold-out we have it both digitally and in hard copy. And this fold-out allows you to walk through closing a gap using the sequence we talked about today. And by the way, we also, and then it has a reporting piece for a leader report as well. It's pretty cool on the digital tool as well. And you can be certified at piltools.com if you sign up for our training to be Accountability Training certified. It's a professional accreditation that you can put on your resume. So you may have an interest in that as well at some point. I'm going to post the last poll here. Feel free at your leisure to respond to that on the right-hand side of the screen. And that'll help us know who would like follow-up to talk about other kinds of things. But I'm going to close this webinar and begin the Q&A in just a minute. But I'm going to close this webinar with this slide. There's 3 kinds of people in the world. You've heard this before. People who make it happen, people who watch it happen, people who wonder what happened. We've actually learned there's a 4th kind of person, and that's people who never knew anything happened. And the question is, how do you create a culture where it's filled with people who make it happen? But that's what people are focused on in getting the job done. That's what this training and this focus is all about. So we're going to move into our Q&A portion of the webinar today. Really appreciate your attendance. Please stay on as long as you'd like to. And send your questions via the Q&A tab on the right-hand side of the screen over to Adrienne, and she'll present those questions to me. So Adrienne, what questions do we have today?
Thank you, Roger. Our first question comes from Edmund, and Edmund is asking, if upper management has not bought into the audit principle, has there been examples of implementing the principle bottom up? It seems futile if it's not a top-down. Thoughts?
Yeah, great question. I would say my answer to that question would be that it's a relative top-down kind of approach. So in other words, you as an individual can make this choice to operate above the line, and you can employ these questions at closing gaps, and it will serve you well. So at the individual level, it's kind of like it doesn't matter if anyone else is doing it or not, you benefit. Now, if you're talking about a team, unless the team leadership's involved, that gets really hard. So that's the relative top, it's the team leadership. If it's the department, it's the departmental leadership. If it's the division, it's the division leadership. If it's the region, it's the regional leadership, and if it's the enterprise, it needs to be enterprise leadership. So that relative top has to be emulating these traits and working this process to make it work. But all the way down to the individual level, there's still great benefit in taking accountability to get that done. Great question, and I hope that clarifies it.
Thank you, Roger. Our next question today comes from Marcy. How would you apply this principle to obtaining and keeping employees, more specifically in the healthcare industry, since we don't really have a product and we're selling only a service?
Well, I think people like working in an above-the-line atmosphere. It's caustic when you're working in a below-the-line atmosphere. If there's a lot of blaming going on, people aren't taking accountability, they're not collaborating cross-functionally, they're not open and candid in their comments to one another, they're not helping each other think through how to do things differently. That kind of culture, that kind of environment won't keep your best people. Your best people want to work in an environment where people are taking accountability to get results. They're able to see it on it, solve it, and do it, and they're focused on what else we can do. So I think from that perspective, an above-the-line culture is totally, I call it cultural handcuffs. I mean, who wants to lead that? How often do you see it? When it's created, it's such a unique thing. And our clients create it all the time with our training. But it does differentiate them. And many of our clients have become best employer status in their city, states, and even on a national level because of some of that work. From a retention point of view, you can treat that just like you would a gap. So if I go back to this gap slide, let me just go back to it real quick here. The gap slide, you can approach it just like that, and you can say our gap. Oops, no, too far. Our gap is engagement, and you could say it's engagement. You could say it's retention, and what we want to do is close that gap on retention. Now you ask these questions: what is the reality we most need to acknowledge? How are we contributing to the problem and our solution? What else can we do? And what are we accountable to do and by when? A really good, useful way of thinking about solving that problem.
Thank you, Roger. Our next question comes from Kathy. I'd like to know how to handle a leadership team that is divided. Say 50% bought into these principles and the other 50% have not.
Well, I would say that the biggest way, the most important way to get a team to buy in to what we're talking about here is to focus on results. And remember, our premise in the very beginning was that accountability begins by clearly defining the result. There aren't too many leaders that don't get that. And so if what we're talking about is a discussion about results and creating accountability for results, that's the right discussion to have. Now, how we frame it up is how does this methodology, help us do that? And I would think that most leaders would understand something like the SOSD accountability tool, that this is about closing gaps and creating accountability to close gaps. But it's not good enough just to have a methodology like this. You also have to have a culture that accompanies it, a culture where people are thinking above the line, they're working above the line, they're acting above the line. Those would be the three ingredients that I would present to a leader to help them understand the value of this approach. To focus on key results, the top 3 or 4, the connection with that with accountability gaps. An accountability gap is a performance gap related to a key result, and then creating an environment where people can operate above the line and go attack it. That's a pretty solid combination to get stuff done.
Thank you. Our next comment comes from Mike. There was a reference to a SOSD accountability tool. I am in your Culture Track program with online access to PIL tools. I don't see this tool in my tools.
That's correct. That's a great observation. This SOSD accountability tool is available through the self-track. So if you're on the culture track, I'm just kind of flipping back to it here. If you're on the culture track, you would not have access to that. If your organization moves into the self-track, then that's when you'd have access to this content. Hope that's a helpful clarification.
Thank you, Roger. Kimberly is asking, I work for a family-owned company, second generation, that has a very below-the-line attitude. There must be someone to blame. How do I facilitate a change in culture where the owners are insulted if anyone gives them an idea to make changes to help?
That's a tough one. Obviously, you're dealing in an environment that's difficult and requires for people to want to move to a better place. So I'd say the problem here is, what is the value proposition that you're presenting to them that would cause them to want to think differently? In other words, do they have an objective they want to achieve? Are they looking to exit the business? Are they looking to retire? Are they looking to grow the business? What is it that would cause them to say, I have an interest in thinking differently? Once you have that, then this framework is a great framework to present in terms of thinking through how you get there. But there's got to be a motivation overall, and I would say that sounds like the biggest challenge given this brief conversation.
Thank you, Roger. Lisa is asking, in a top-down culture that works off the stay-in-your-lane mentality, what else can I do? It's hard for employees to engage in. How do you overcome this?
Yeah, that stay-in-the-lane mentality, this kind of the silo focus, is the biggest corporate structure sometimes is the biggest enemy to achieving what the corporate structure was originally created to do, and that is to get the result we're looking for. By the way, it's really important to understand that you are perfectly designed right now to get the results that you're currently looking for, to get the results you're currently producing. You're perfectly designed for that. The issue is, are there other results that you need to get that would allow you to get to a better place and accomplish something more powerful? So it's really about creating a joint accountability for the results we're working to achieve. And I'm just looking for that slide now, see if I can find it. This is that, if you remember that slide where we had all the little boxes, and in those little boxes we had a real clear understanding that the only thing that brought them together was a joint accountability for results. It's kind of like, I don't know if you remember the baseball star Dale Murphy, who was on the Atlanta Braves. I think he was a 5-time MVP, just a terrific guy. He's actually a personal friend of mine. And Dale and I were talking, and he said, the way it's organized in a baseball field is that everyone has their own position to play. It's kind of your own stand-alone activity. But when they're out in the field, they're coordinating like crazy, and they have different calls that they make to one another. And when it really works well, it's when this team is calling out to each other, take it, don't take it, go to the right, go to the left, it's high, move back, whatever those calls are, and they're working seamlessly and collaboratively. That's what has to happen in organizations today. But what ties everyone together is catching the ball. It's that one clear result. So when an organization has 3 or 4 clear key results they want to achieve, that's what brings all the functions together if you create accountability for those results. Then it's not about process. It's not about work and activity. It's about results. That's what we're measuring, that's what we're accountable for, and that's what causes us to work together.
Thank you, Roger. Our next question is, in today's lean organizations where everyone is stretched and hiring is on a freeze, how does one find time to see it, own it, solve it, and do it?
You don't have time not to. It's an imperative. It's not an option. You're going to do that one way or the other, but it is absolutely essential that you have the ability to ask these questions and plan that into the work stream so you can solve difficult problems that are going to lead to accomplishing the key results you're looking to achieve. This SOSD tool that we're talking about here is absolutely critical to being able to get where you want to go as an organization. You're going to be spending the time one way or the other. So I would say, if you're in an environment now where you feel like there's no time to stop and really think about this and brainstorm, offer that forward. Create the opportunity with your team leader. Talk about what is the key result that we're lagging in, an accountability gap that we need to solve, and then do the exercise. And I think you'll find that the proof is in the pudding. The value that comes from that conversation and the effort will be immense. The best way to do this, though, is to get trained. And it's either to have us come in and do the training or get the training from us, license the training from us, to do the training in your organization. Then you create a culture that really values this. And I'd really encourage you to do that, because when you adopt a model, the value of having a model like the steps to accountability is that we've agreed that this is how we're going to operate. We can help each other when we're below the line. In our company, people will actually say from time to time, I think we're below the line right now. I had a conversation earlier today about that. It was constructive. It wasn't destructive. It was positive. And the person I was talking to was so receptive to it. They're like, you're probably right. I am stuck below the line. Well, that didn't make them wrong, but it helped them recognize, and that's probably not effective. And now, what does it look like to get above the line? That's a great coaching mechanism. And I offered that to them, and they were totally receptive. They said, right, I'm going to think about that. You're right. That's the right way to think about this. And it led to getting to a better place. So when you adopt this kind of model of thinking, we can now talk to each other in a different way that gives permission to do that even with people we report to. It's really useful to have a common model for thinking. That's what the training helps you do.
Thank you, Roger. Mike is asking, when encountering others that go below the line, other than staying above the line yourself, are there techniques that encourage collective above the line behavior?
Yeah, for sure. We have the Lift Accountability Coaching Model that we present in our Others Track training, which is focused on helping other people take accountability and get the job you need done. So you might want to attend that webinar or look at that book, How Does That Happen? But we present in the webinar that whole methodology about how do you get others in the right place. Here's what I would say in the meantime. We talked about feedback and how important feedback in the see it step was to getting the result you're looking for. And it's just really is critical to have a feedback-rich environment when you're looking to get feedback to happen in the right way. When people are asking what feedback do you have for me, it allows the opportunity to coach and be able to move people to a different place. So if feedback precedes problems, the notion of exchanging feedback precedes problems, that's a winning formula, because now when the problem arises, you have a context. You can say, let's do some feedback. All right, well, tell me what feedback do you have for me? You get both appreciative and constructive feedback, and they know that feedback shouldn't be threatening. It shouldn't be seen as a performance review. It's simply a coaching opportunity to help improve, and they say, well, thanks for the feedback. That's going to be really helpful for me. That's a great environment and a great tool to have working for you in those situations.
Thank you. Stephanie is asking, do you have any tips on implementing or approaching this for use in global teams?
Yeah, so global teams, I think we're talking about, would this work across international boundaries, and certainly with co-located teams physically in a space, it lends itself to some of these dialogues. But if you're looking on a global level, number one, I'd say you have to be virtual. You have to have a set of digital tools, just like we've talked about. It's really hard to operationalize these things without accessing a digital solution. And that's why we've created PIL tools as a digital solution to be able to get that job done. It's what allows you to keep these conversations going and focus on the way that we've been describing. And my belief is that the digital solution is sometimes even better than the in-person solutions. I'll just show you a couple of frames from it. We have an automated feedback system that allows you to do feedback exchanges digitally. It's a real effective tool. It shows you graphically how people respond. It gives you survey options and polling options. It allows for crowdsourcing as well. Very social. Allows you to socialize the issue and get people to engage. It's really a robust tool that allows for these kinds of things and that kind of interaction. In terms of the global applicability of the tools themselves and what we're talking about, we have clients all over the world, multinational, that have found it so useful to have a common set of language and vocabulary that everyone understands, whether you're in France or Russia or Germany, Japan, wherever you might be. You have this common model that allows you to facilitate conversation and is shorthand for getting right to the problem quickly. So on a global level, this is highly impactful.
Thank you, Roger. Marcy is asking, would you recommend one person teaching this series or assigning the book to team leaders?
If you're going to train it, you really need to get a license to do the training. So, I mean, you can open the book and read them, but that's not nearly as impactful as actually either having someone from Partners Leadership come on site to do the training, or you can do a quick start and you can remotely get certified to do our training in your organization. And that's also a very effective way to do it. So both of those options are available to you.
Thank you, Roger. Our next question comes from Matthew. Progressive discipline is a commonly used tool. Would you recommend using or not using this tool?
I think there's the strategy, obviously, as you move from step to step and you sequence into more serious ramifications as people aren't ready to respond. And in our others track training, we talk about how to manage unmet expectations, and that's another webinar you could attend. But managing unmet expectations, it's not as much about discipline as it is about coaching and framing up the problem in the right way that people can solve it. Now, at the end of the day, not everyone's going to be able to perform and do what you need them to do, but there are so many more that can move through that process. So we offer a technique and approach in the others track training that, in my mind, precedes progressive discipline. It gives you another avenue, another place to go in a formal coaching mechanism that is highly successful. You might want to check into that. It could be really useful to you.
Thank you. Rebecca is asking, what happens if you're on a team where a key colleague does not want to take accountability and is fine with having others do his work?
So that's probably not an uncommon characteristic, something that people run into, and the question is, how do I solve that? If you've created this context in this training, then you have the feedback mechanisms that are available to you. Otherwise, it's a leadership responsibility to address that issue. Look, here's what we think. We think that every employee has an ethical obligation to want to understand what are the 3 or 4 top key results an organization is working to achieve, and then to do all they can to achieve it. That's what they're being paid to do. That's why they're members of an organization. And the organization has an obligation to the employee to clearly define what those results are and then provide the resources necessary to get it done. And there's that dance that happens between employee and employer in terms of making sure that that's balanced and working effectively. When it gets out of balance or it's not working effectively, that's when you get issues with morale, issues with traction. They're not working. But if you're getting that equation right, and employees have that sense of obligation and accountability to the organization to sign up for the top 3 results and go get it done, and then the organization has the obligation and is fulfilling it to clearly define what those are, then empower the organization with the resources necessary to do it. You've got a winning formula that gets people engaged, and you're going to leave very few behind. Some will be left behind, but very few.
Thank you, Roger. Melanie is asking, what happens if leaders really don't want to hear the feedback or the team doesn't feel comfortable being trained on giving feedback? What are the techniques we can use to gather and present that feedback for best effect?
They need to be trained in this process. That's the only solution I have for you. I mean, you can try some tricks and you can tee it up and you can try to get them ready, use some warming strategies, talk about results, ask them what do you think would be helpful if, and do some of those kinds of things. But those are limited techniques to really move someone. What really moves them is understanding this dynamic, understanding accountability, understanding how feedback relates to accountability, understanding how accountability relates to results, understanding how gaps relate to getting success. And when you get a leader understanding the training in this context, then you can have those kind of conversations, and their frame of mind changes. They get a whole new mindset. We see leaders change actually in the training itself. You can watch them. You can actually almost identify the moment where the light went off and they went, oh, okay. Yeah, what feedback do you have for me? Because now I get it. So I would say the training is your best solution to opening that frame of mind and getting a new point of view.
Thank you, Roger. Can you answer for Karen, how can this be applied to startups and small business owners?
Oh, that's an exciting time because it's so new in the organization. You're just forming your values and your, what we call the change narrative, your roadmap, your vision, your mission, your values, your purpose, your culture, your customer brand experience, your compelling case for change, your focus on results. All of that's coming together in a formative stage. So starting right out of the chutes, and we've worked with many startups where they were so grateful to have this context at the very beginning, because in the startup mode, it's so easy to go below the line, because so many things are unplanned and unimaginable that you never thought would happen, and your best plans are getting sidetracked and derailed all the time. So having an environment where we've said, we're not going to let ourselves get stuck there, we're going to move on, that's really important. Now, startups tend to attract people who more intuitively, innately do this, right? But they still get stuck because it's so difficult and complex. So having this model really is helpful at that stage of the game.
Thank you. Lewis is asking, my organization is often waiting on finance to see it. This costs valuable time in moving to own it, solve it, and do it. How would you push the team to see it on their own and not be bottlenecked by finance?
Yeah, that's a good question. And without knowing a little bit more on that, it would be hard for me to say. But here's what I would say when we're talking about the environment we're creating. We're trying to create an environment where people are anxious to obtain the perspectives of others, and they're open and candid, and we're transparent, right? So our ability to see it quickly becomes really important. Now, if you're trying to get others to see it quickly, the challenge is, how do you frame that conversation up? And again, I'm going to come back to, you do the training. In the context of the training, we now give permission to each other to have those kind of conversations. Outside of that, what I would say is your ability to get others to be open to a new point of view probably has to be leveraged with leadership in terms of creating a culture where we're creating a working culture where we value that kind of interaction. And it's valued greatly. There's some organizations that use Chatter on Salesforce, they use Yammer, they use Jive, they use SharePoint. We use our digital toolset, PIO tools, cross-functionally, collaboratively, that I think is far and above any of those that I mentioned in terms of driving the kind of feedback and collaboration that really impacts results. So ultimately, that's the culture you want to create. I understand the challenge with it. No easy answer other than I think the fastest way to do that is to do the training.
Thank you, Roger. And as we prepare to wrap up today, we do have two additional questions that have come in. The first of which is from Marcy. How do you get other operational departments on board when your frontline client-facing associates are on board for accountability, but depend on internal partners to deliver results to the client, and they're typically below the line?
I think that's a leadership imperative. You have to get aligned with that front line. You can't have layers or levels or groups or pockets or silos that aren't connected in the right way. You have to fix that. And leaders have to recognize that as a culture imperative to fix that gap and to solve that so that you have alignment from the top of the organization to the front line. And, I forget who it was, Jack Welch or someone said that anyone above the front line is all talk, right? I mean, it happens on the front line. The brand experience, the customer experience happens there. And you better be darn sure that everything you're doing in the organization is aligned to make that happen in the right way. Your culture drives your frontline experience. And you can't have a culture where we're not reactive to one another and then expect the frontline to be reactive to the client. I mean, you might have been successful creating some kind of subculture that isolates the two and the frontline is able to do that, but that's not going to last very long if you have an organizational culture that's not supporting it. So getting those aligned is absolutely critical. It's a great question.
Thank you, Roger. And our last question today comes from Carl. When an organization has too many irons in the fire, how can we start to be accountable for all of the items going on? How do you start?
Yeah, you start by clearly identifying the results you most need people to focus on. Those 3 or 4 key results that define everything for the organization. Once you prioritize, it becomes easy for everyone else to say, okay, I get it. That's the hill I need to take. But if you look out and say, that's the mountain range you need to take, it's like, where do I start? You want me to take the mountain range? Well, I want you to take the hill. It's that hill right there that we want you to take. When people have that kind of clarity, it all happens. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on the webinar today with you, and thank you for staying with us on the Q&A. I think Adrienne has some closing notes.
Thank you, Roger. We certainly want to thank everyone for attending the webinar today, and we'd like you to know that as you log out, you'll be directed to our website where you can obtain additional information about upcoming public workshops and our new author audio podcast series, which is available on iTunes. Just search for Roger Connors or Partners in Leadership to access those. We'd like to remind you of our upcoming public workshops. We'll be in San Diego, California on April 16th and in Salt Lake City, Utah on April 21st. Our next webinar will be held on Wednesday, May 6th, and during this webinar, Roger will be discussing our culture track. For those of you interested in continuing education credits, today's webinar is approved through the HR Certification Institute and through NASBA, and you can find information regarding continuing education on our website that's found under the Info tab on our homepage. Many of you have asked, and we'd like to let you know that we will be posting a recording of today's webinar on our website by the end of the day, and you will receive an email that will contain a link so that you can access that recording or share it with others. Again, we'd like to thank you for joining us today, and this concludes